The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waking humanity, one soul at a time. This is the World You Don't Know radio show with your host, Nick O'Connell.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, you're very welcome along to this week's edition of The World You Don't Know. Myself, Mick O'Connell, and I have a guest lined up. I have a gentleman called, I'm going to try and pronounce his name correctly now. I have a gentleman called Gearóid Ó Colmáin, or Colmáin, I think. I'm not sure what it is, but he'll clarify this now. I just explained to him there, I'm not very good at Irish, but he is an Irish guy, and he's a journalist based in Paris. We're going to be talking about what's going on in Myanmar. Now, I had this guy on last year, about a year ago, and I'd since met him in February. We had a nice chat and a pint together down in Waterford at the Open Minds Ireland conference. And when I was talking to him last year, he was talking about what was going on in Myanmar when no one else was. So this guy's a bit of an expert in my eyes on what's actually going on over there compared to what we've been told on the mainstream media. Now, he's also appeared on Press TV, and he's quite a regular on that TV show, and he's a bit of an expert on what's really going on around the world, geopolitically speaking. So I'm going to go straight to Gearóid. Good evening, Gearóid.
Hi, Mick.
How are you?
Grand. How are you yourself?
Oh, not too bad. Listen, it's great getting you back on the show. Thanks very much for agreeing to come back on.
No problem. It's great to be here.
So I don't know if you heard the intro there, but did I pronounce your name correctly? Gearóid Ó Colmáin.
You nearly got it right, yeah. You weren't far off. Gearóid Ó Colmáin.
Right, now, you're back down in Cork, it'd be Gary Coleman, is that right?
Well, it could be Gearóid Ó Colmáin if I was out in the Middle East.
Right, but I nearly got it right anyway. So, well, listen, how are you keeping on? Are you doing okay?
Yeah, grand, yeah.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Listen, there's an awful lot going on in the world since we last spoke down in Waterford. The world has really gone a little bit crazy now with Donald Trump at the helm, and now Kim Jong-un, the rocket man, having a little set to with him. But what we're going to be talking about most of all tonight on the show is what's going on in Myanmar.
Right.
With the Rohingya. Do you want to explain to the listeners where Myanmar is, who both sides are, and what actually is transpiring over there?
It's Southeast Asia, near Bangladesh. It borders Bangladesh, India, Thailand, and China. And it's a really, I'm not an expert in the country. That's the first thing I have to say. I mean, I'm new to it myself. I mean, I've been looking at this problem now, I suppose, for a few years because the violence started there around 2012, and it really took off. From then, 2013, particularly last year when we spoke, there had been a major attack, and more and more reports coming out about genocide in that country, and a lot of these reports were kind of appearing on websites. They weren't really mainstream news for a while, but most of them were basically fake news, photographs from other conflicts around the world. Said to be from Myanmar. One of the pictures they showed was earthquake victims in China in 2010, where monks were basically picking up the bodies, and they said that was a genocide of Rohingya, and the term Rohingya began to be heard for the first time.
Now, who exactly or what exactly is the Rohingya?
They're Bengali. The Bengali minority in the state of Rakhine, in the northern part of that state, which is Myanmar is a federation of states, and there are many ethnicities. 135 ethnicities in the country. Right. And many of those ethnic groups have been in insurgency against the central government for years. I mean, there was a civil war there, which is one of the longest in modern history. So the country has basically, since even since independence, it's constantly had insurgencies. And a lot of these insurgencies have been Western backed. So the British backed the Karen insurgents. The British and the Americans backed the Kachin insurgents. And so the country, has always been attacked, essentially, and there's been covert war going on there for decades. The Rohingya, first of all, the term, there's no such thing as Rohingya. Basically, what we're talking about are the Bengali minority in Myanmar. They're originally, they're ethnically Bengali. So they're from, Bangladesh, but Bangladesh was part of Pakistan because you had East and West Pakistan. And all of them were part of India, so it's the
it's the remnants of the British Empire, what they left behind.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the cutting and chopping that went on, creating these countries.
Now, I read it. Can I just
these problems.
I read a book there recently. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to get your hands on it, called The Sovereign Republic of Ireland, and it's written by a gentleman called Thomas McGrath, who is the Vice President of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. But he mentioned India in the book in relation to the British Empire and what they actually did there, because when they left, they chopped the place up into so many small little pieces and played minorities off against majorities and put minorities into power, to keep the status quo, everybody fighting, going right up to this day. And that's the root cause of what's actually going on there now. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the policy of putting minorities in power was used everywhere, that's for sure.
It's used here too, yeah.
In basically, without going into too much detail, because it is very, very complicated, and you can kind of go back centuries, and and you really just spend all night just trying to describe this problem. But to simplify it, the Bengali after independence, after the independence of Burma from the British Empire. They got independence in 1948, but even before then, before they actually got independence, the Muslim population, the Bengali Muslim population in that part of Rakhine State, they wanted that section to be added on to Pakistan. They didn't want to be part of Burma, so they wanted that to be attached to Pakistan. So they basically waged a war against the new state, set up in 1948. And that lasted for many, many years, several decades. That didn't work. Eventually they were defeated and so on. But they always wanted that section to be added on to Pakistan at the time. And then when Bangladesh got independence in 1971, a very brutal war, a genocide of estimated about 3 million people committed by the Pakistanis against the Bengalis. A lot of the people in eastern Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, that was breaking away from Western Pakistan, a lot of the people who supported Western Pakistan against Eastern Pakistan, those people fled the new country of Bangladesh across the border into Myanmar and went into that province of North Rakhine where all the trouble is today. And they were refugees. And so because they were refugees, they didn't qualify for citizenship. So they remained in camps. And of course, those camps, conditions were not good. And the Burmese government was trying to get them repatriated. And there were several attempts. In 1970, they tried to get them repatriated in conjunction with the United Nations in 1978. And it didn't work. There were all kinds of problems between the two countries because each country keeps basically saying it's the other's fault or the other's problem. And they keep going over the border, and it's a nightmare because essentially, obviously for the people in North Rakhine State themselves, just the ordinary people, they're going over and back like yo-yos, and they've no state, and they're being manipulated on all sides. They're being manipulated in the camps by the Islamists, by the Saudis and the Pakistani extremists, and radicalized. And that's a big problem because they're killing the local population. The main killing that's going on really is the local Buddhist population, who are a minority in North Rakhine State. They're being basically ethnically cleansed, and that's an ongoing process. And in the recent violence, there have been thousands of people obviously displaced. Most of the Bengalis have left and gone back to Bangladesh. We don't know how many of them would qualify for citizenship because there's a citizenship law they passed in Myanmar in 1982. And if it was implemented properly, it could solve a lot of the problems. But the implementation has been bad, and we don't know how many of those people would actually qualify for citizenship. So Aung San Suu Kyi, the leader of, or the state councillor, if you like, of Myanmar, has said that they have a process of verification. In other words, they want to find out how many of those people who fled would qualify for citizenship or whatever. They're trying to regulate the problem, but it really, really is difficult, and it's compounded by the fact that you have all these Islamist groups being financed by the Pakistanis, the Saudis, with Western backing. These NGOs linked to the State Department, like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, all these UN agencies controlled by the United States and the CIA, they're all over the place and they're causing havoc. And what's being ignored is the ongoing ethnic cleansing of the indigenous Rakhine Buddhists, who, as I say, are a minority in that province. And
how many of them would there be in Rakhine State? How many Buddhists would there be there? Actually,
how many Buddhists I don't know, because right now there's so much displacement. I'm actually not sure, but I think they're certainly like a 3 or 4%, I think,
right
at this stage. I mean, they're a very small minority, so they're really outnumbered in North Rakhine. Now, the Muslims are a minority in the country as a whole, but they are a majority here, and so they basically, the Islamists, and again we have to make a distinction between the Islamists, the leaders, the imams, the Saudi-backed terrorists. These are the people who are basically using the refugees as weapons to get a state carved out for themselves, and to try and create a kind of a Kosovo in that part. And the United States wants to create a Kosovo there because they want to have a client state that they can use to prevent Chinese expansion in Southeast Asia, particularly Myanmar, because they've got a huge port there in Rakhine State, and I keep pronouncing it wrong. It's Rakhine State, sorry. They have a huge port there, and the Chinese want to use that port to export or import Middle Eastern oil into Western China through Myanmar. And so, the Chinese One Belt, One Road integration policy is what the US is basically targeting with this. And this is why the Western media, all the Western NGOs are all pushing the genocide narrative. There is ethnic cleansing taking place on both sides, but in particular against the Buddhist population. I mean, in 2012, many mosques were burnt down by Buddhist extremists. So there has been violence on all sides.
I mean, it sounds a bit of when you say the word Buddhist and extremist in the same sentence, they just sort of don't go together. Here in the West we think of Buddhists as peace-loving, Buddhists sitting under a tree. We don't think of them as this.
The Buddhists in Rakhine, the Theravada Buddhists of Myanmar, it's the home of Buddhism, really, along with Sri Lanka in Asia. They're not really, they're being demonized for violence, but the real violent Buddhists are people like the Dalai Lama. I've written about him before. He's a CIA agent. He's worked for the CIA for decades. He's paid by the CIA. And if you look at their behavior in Tibet, I mean, they set themselves on fire. They threaten anybody who criticizes the Dalai Lama. Those people who are adored in the West, they are the real terrorists in terms of, there is Buddhist terrorism. And the Dalai Lama has deep links with terrorist groups in Asia. And all over the world, in fact. And so he's a CIA operative. The monks in Myanmar are basically being targeted. That doesn't mean that there aren't extremists among them. I mean, some of them have been put in jail by the government for extremism. So, and the hatred is growing there now. You can see it on both sides. I mean, it's the sectarian killing is. It's
I mean, it sort of reminds you what went on in the Balkans back in the 1990s. The amount of hatred that was developed between these people.
I mean, if you're a Buddhist and your village is attacked by these Muslim gangs, and people are slaughtered,
you've got a reason to hate them.
Yeah. People are going to start, the hatred is going to, and for the Burmese population as a whole, it's extremely frustrating because nobody's listening to them. There's extensive evidence of the ethnic cleansing. They discovered yesterday, I think it's since yesterday and today, 45 bodies of mass grave were recovered, men, women and children, just chopped to bits and thrown in a mass grave.
It's disgusting.
They're Hindu victims of these Bengali terrorists. So they're discovering lots of mass graves, a lot of empty villages, and still thousands of people missing.
Do you see this as another Rwanda?
Well, Rwanda is an interesting example. It's more, I mean, you could mention lots of precedents here, right? You could mention Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Yes and no. I mean, it's what happened in Rwanda is similar in the sense that the West caused the genocide in Rwanda. Very few people have studied Rwanda, but the West sent in terrorists into Rwanda from 1991 to 1994, slaughtered all before them. And that led to, the mass slaughter, where people on both sides got slaughtered, but it was particularly the Tutsis who were doing the slaughtering. The media turned it upside down and said it was the Hutus, and they were the ones who got blamed. And in that sense, it's like that, because the people who are doing the slaughtering, the mass slaughtering in North Rakhine are the Islamist groups, and there are at least 30,000 of them now. And they're in the jungle, and they still haven't got all of them. And of course, they're going over and back over the border. They've taken, I think, a lot of captives into the refugee camps in Bangladesh, a lot of Hindu captives. But other ethnic groups are getting slaughtered as well. So this is a real nightmare. I mean, I haven't seen any evidence yet of army massacres, of massacres by the military. I'm not saying they haven't done them, but I haven't seen any evidence. I mean, I haven't seen anything. I haven't even seen any credible photo other than photos of people dead. But there's no evidence of mass killing, like deliberate targeting of civilians by the military yet. There is extensive evidence of civilians being targeted by the Al-Qaeda-linked groups, and civilians of all religions, like Muslims have been killed by them. There are many eyewitness reports I've seen, and there are many journalists working in Myanmar. Independent journalists, not working for the state, but working on their own, interviewing people. All of this stuff is online. Even from here, you can get a lot of information. I'm in contact with lots and lots of people there. The reason why the government isn't allowing journalists into Rakhine State to operate freely is because they can't trust them. Most of these journalists are not really journalists. They're
repeaters, as David Icke likes to call them. They just repeat the government line.
Yeah, and many of them are operatives. They're Secret Service operatives, and you simply can't take a risk. You can't just if these agencies are waging war against your country and then claiming they're journalists. I mean, the problem with the Western media is that it isn't their job to go in and tell the world what's happening. It's what their job consists of is going in and telling what their bosses want the world to know, and the bosses are the people who meet behind closed doors in big organizations like the Bilderberg Group, in big international agencies, and has absolutely nothing to do with what's really happening. And we've seen that over and over again in every conflict in Syria and Libya. And so really the paradigm again is the same one. The people who are screaming for intervention and screaming to save the Rohingya are the people committing most of the crimes. And these are heinous crimes. These are really, really heinous crimes, targeting children, targeting families. I have no doubt about the brutality of the Burmese military, because they are
the history tells you exactly what the Burmese military were like.
They are very brutal, they've been in war for decades. So we don't really need to talk about that. That's pretty well known. But at the same time, you have to look at what's credible. And a military can be brutal, but it's a highly trained an equipped military. They're professional brutes, if you want to call them that.
Yeah.
But they're not going to start going in and slaughtering people. That's not how you do it. I mean, that's not how you put down an insurgency, and it wouldn't be in their interests.
But your women and children are not insurgents. I mean, they're the innocent victims of all of this.
Yeah, it's not. It's just not how modern counterinsurgency is done, really. I mean, and I'm not making any excuses for the military. It's just that a lot of the stories coming out are more like the kind of the atrocities committed by these terrorist groups, these Al-Qaeda-linked groups, because they are just drug brutes. They are just psychopaths.
But listen, Gearóid, I need to take a quick break. Do you mind hanging on for a couple of minutes?
Yeah, no
That'd
problem.
be brilliant. Folks, I need to take a quick ad break, and I'll be back in 2 minutes with Gearóid Ó Colmáin. Talk to you very shortly.
You're listening to Liffey Sound on 96.4 FM.
Now, folks, you're very welcome back. The text number is 087 062 7138. That's 087 062 7138. Gearóid, just before the break there, you mentioned the leader of Myanmar. What's that woman's name? I can never pronounce her name. Yeah, no. Yeah. What's she doing about this, considering that for the whole of the 90s and early 90s and maybe part of the 80s as well, she was under house arrest, and she was sort of like the poster girl for, world peace and human rights and stuff like that. Bono would mention her every time he does a concert and whatnot. Yeah. So she's in a position of power now. What is she doing about this?
Well, there isn't really much she can do. It's true that she was very much the darling of the West for years. And she became, as you say, a kind of a poster girl for this kind of human rights. The idea that the West supports human rights and democracy and peace,
which they don't. I mean, we know they don't.
Absolutely not. But she eventually, the West were supporting her because they thought that she would get in and liberalize the regime there. Liberalize meaning basically open it up to Western pillage, Western penetration, and allow them access to their resources and turn it into a kind of a neoliberal colony. And so that was basically why the British and Americans were supporting her. And she played along with it for years, and obviously she was under house arrest, and she kind of profited from that. And she was also useful to the West in that sense. But now it's a different story because, she's in government. They've been in government for over 18 months. And they created a position called a state councillor for her because technically she can't be president because she was born abroad, and there's a law against that. State officials whose children were born abroad cannot basically serve in office, which is a very good law actually. But anyway, she can't technically be president, but they created a new role called state councillor. So she's kind of de jure leader, but the real power is still with the military there. So now she's actually played. I've begun to respect her more and more because I think she's handled this extremely well. Actually, I think she's handled this crisis very well since last year, in particular, because she's basically doing her job, which is to serve the state and protect national sovereignty. That's her job as the state councillor, as the kind of head of state. She's supposed to uphold the law of the country, and so she simply held that line. The Burmese government does not recognise the Rohingya as a separate ethnic group because they're not. They're essentially Bengali. Some of them could qualify for immigrants because some of them are there with generations. That's for sure. But many of them aren't.
So is the Rohingya what was created after the British broke up that region? When they handed out India back. There's a problem as well with mass immigration in that area because Bangladesh is overpopulated. There's about 160 million people, and it's just exploding with people. And you have the phenomenon of the boat people. So the boat people, there's a lot of trafficking of Bangladeshis, and in the Bay of Bengal, and a lot of them are getting washed up in Myanmar and ending up in camps. And there's a lot of terrorism in Bangladesh. Like, the country has a real problem with Wahhabi extremists. And these people, these organizations, and the West do want to carve out a kind of a Kosovo type state.
So Aung San Suu Kyi, in my opinion, has dealt with this crisis quite well. She hasn't bowed down to the West. She's been very clear, and she's put up with a lot of abuse. But she seems to, she's I don't think that she's buying the Western argument for at all on this, and she has come up with the basis for the solution, and it's going to have to involve a deal with Bangladesh. And I think that now this gets really complicated because it's interesting here. You've got two women leaders here. You've got Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar and Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh, and they're both daughters of the founding fathers of their nations. Like Aung San Suu Kyi is the daughter of General Aung San, who was kind of the hero, founding father of Myanmar, and Sheikh Hasina is the daughter of the founding father of Bangladesh, Sheikh Mujib Rahman. Sheikh Mujib Rahman and Sheikh Hasina's family, that's the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, her family was assassinated. The entire family was assassinated, and the CIA were behind it. That was revealed by an American journalist recently who had the information from the former American ambassador.
And would she know this? Do you think she knows that the CIA is behind her?
She absolutely.
So she'd have zero respect then for the American administration.
She cannot not know it. Sheikh Hasina was in Germany at the time. Her father was killed, her mother and her siblings.
So she would know the Americans were behind this.
Oh, I'm sure she would. Yeah. I'm sure she would, but she won't say it. The Americans did not want Sheikh Hasina to take power in Bangladesh. They've
so now that she has got power,
for a long time.
That's a problem for them, then, isn't it? If she's in power,
it's a big power. It's a big problem. They didn't. She won the election in 2014. The Americans didn't want her. All the opposition parties boycotted the elections, and the British and Americans started going on and saying, this is a disgrace, and they're even calling her, country a regime now. It's not. She's not being totally demonized yet. But
it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, and the thing is that Sheikh Hasina's government, they're not behind the destabilization. They're not supporting the terrorists, but in fact, they're threatened by them too. So Sheikh Hasina doesn't really recognize the Rohingya either. She doesn't fall for this because she knows that many of them are the people basically who opposed her father in independence, these pro-Pakistani extremists. So the Sheikh Hasina government, the Awami League government in Bangladesh, they are not happy with this at all. The opposition in Bangladesh have links to the Islamists, and they also have links to Israel. In fact, they've met with the Israeli government, and they were accused by Sheikh Hasina's government of basically trying to overthrow the government in conjunction with Israel.
So
this is where things get really murky and messy and dangerous, because essentially what I think is going to happen is a general election there next year in Bangladesh, and if you've got all these camps now, Sheikh Hasina is feeding them all. The Bangladeshi people are extremely generous, and they have a tremendous capacity to deal with humanitarian crises. But if the United States wants to get rid of Hasina, you could have an Islamist insurgency in Bangladesh, or you could have a colour revolution, or you could have an assassination. They've already tried to assassinate her a few times. And they've got all of these, extremists in these camps. And I'm not saying all those refugees are extremists, but there are lots of Rohingya terrorists in those camps, and they're being recruited and so on. And they've got lots of manpower to call on if they want regime change in Bangladesh. So it could really be a problem for Bangladesh next year.
That could be a serious problem for that part of the world as well, of Bangladesh. Does turn into an Islamic country, like a completely Islamic country.
If Bangladesh got destabilized with the population they have, that would spill into India, and you would have a massive influx of another massive influx of refugees and migrants into Europe. Already you are having lots of Bengalis who come to Europe, and they call themselves Rohingya, and they get special status. So this is happening all over the place. The same thing is happening with the Eritreans and Ethiopians. Basically, if you say you're an Eritrean, you can be accepted as a refugee. Most of them are Ethiopians, and the same thing's happening. There's a lot of this kind of scamming going on, But if you have destabilization of Bangladesh and Myanmar, both countries essentially could end up erupting chaos,
But both of those countries, as you said earlier on, they're at a very strategic location as far as Russia and China are concerned.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, China and the US are concerned. Do you see this as a sort of a proxy war between those two countries?
It is. I mean, there are so many factors to take into consideration. I mean, the first thing obviously is that the United States wants to encircle China, and it wants to get control of that area, stop the Chinese integration, stop the Chinese getting access to the Indian Ocean for imports, which is essential for China to develop the western part of China, which is relatively underdeveloped. China really, China, even though it's a massive power, if you compare it to Japan, inland China and western China is still relatively underdeveloped. So the Chinese have a huge push to bring those levels up to other parts of China, and for that they need these routes, these roads, these railways, these networks to get going, to really push it. And of course that's a win-win for everybody who's in all these other countries in comparison to what the West is offering, which is nothing other than terrorist groups and NGOs and all of this stuff. So,
all you see is China wanting to expand its own lot and make its own country just as modern as the West.
Exactly.
They're not threatening.
Their aim is to get to I guess the standard of living of Japan.
Yeah, you don't see them they're not trying to expand any further west. I mean, the Americans seem to be wanting to take over the whole bloody planet at this rate. Yeah,
well, the West is dying and decadent, and really is just trying to prevent everything. They're just, the whole goal of their policy is causing conflict. Whereas, I'm not trying to say there's goodies and baddies in the world and say the Chinese are good and the West is bad. It's just that the Chinese kind of approach is basically building things. You see that everywhere. You see it in Africa. They get access to resources, but in return, they build things.
They build massive infrastructure,
The
West just keep taking out everything, all the oil and the gas and
exactly. They keep taking everything, and then they bloody give you, they start training insurgents, and terrorists and so on. And all the United States is interested in Asia is putting military bases there.
Now, how close is all of this to North Korea, Gearóid?
Well, it's linked. All of it's linked to North Korea because this is the US pivot to Asia. This is basically the final frontier for the US. They need to now. The US has naval power in Asia, right? So there's the conflict in the South China Sea, where the US is using all its naval power in the Philippines and all these islands where the US have massive military bases. But the US doesn't have penetration of the continent as such. So they want to get inland bases like in Myanmar and Tibet if possible. That's why they support the Dalai Lama. They want to get inland bases and control as well of the coast in these countries. And interestingly, if you look at the map with, say, Bangladesh, Bay of Bengal, Myanmar, Thailand, it's the coastal areas that you find lots of Muslim majority regions. And they're being radicalized, and that would basically give the United States a pretext to intervene. They might be intervening to stop the massacres, like in Libya, at the pretext of stopping massacres, or they might be intervening just bombing the Islamic State. In any case, the US will get a foothold. And that's the idea. That basically, like for example, in Myanmar, you could have a situation where the Islamist insurgency gets worse and worse. The Islamic State are there now, and so. In a year or two, they might say to Aung San Suu Kyi, "Hey, look, we'll bomb the Islamic State for you," and who knows what she'll do? She might just go along with it. I mean, I really don't know what role she's going to play in this.
Yeah. But
the US might just kind of say to her, like, let's collaborate. And I mean, that's what the US is doing all over the world. And of course, when they even say that they're going, bombing the Islamic State, they don't. They usually just help them even further,
Well, should have seen a video there on YouTube about. I don't know if you've seen that video on YouTube about a year ago. It was a massive fleet of Islamic State Toyota pickup trucks
Yeah.
And you were getting escorted through the desert by Apache helicopters.
Yeah, sure.
You know, so
I mean, they've been caught over and over again supplying these jihadists, you know. So, you know, for the moment, I think it's probably, you know, when we spoke to you, I spoke to you with the last one last year, and, you know, it was very clear then that the war had started.
Yeah.
The whole genocide thing was basically concocted by human rights groups in conjunction with the Lowenstein Center in Yale University. That was basically paid to come up with a kind of a legal document saying it was genocide. It's complete nonsense. You know, there's an Islamist insurgency in the country. That's the cause of the violence, and they're the people who are doing the mass killing. You know, I'm not defending all the actions of the military there, because I don't really know if they have committed massacres. That may yet emerge.
yeah.
But at this point, I haven't seen any evidence of it. You can't make accusations if you can't see any evidence.
Well, that's true, Gearóid. That's very true. Listen, I need to go to my last break. Do you mind hanging on for 2 more minutes?
Yeah.
And we'll have about 10-15 minutes then when we come back after break. Folks, we'll be back in 2 minutes with Gearóid. Talk to you very shortly.
You're listening to Liffey Sound on 96.4 FM.
Now, folks, you're very welcome back. The text number is 087 062 7138. Now, Gearóid, I have the Google page up here about Myanmar, and Aung San Suu Kyi, she seems to be coming up for an awful lot of stick off the West. I mean, even the UK, she was meant to get an award from the UK Union, and they've suspended the award because of the crisis.
Yeah.
Another headline, the West wanted Aung San Suu Kyi to be a saint. It's no surprise she's not. They're really going all out to rubbish this woman.
Yeah. No, they're in all-out warfare against her. It's just the reason is because she's basically doing her job, which is to defend her country, and the West is at war against Myanmar, and because the West is at war against Myanmar, against the people of Myanmar, and she is their leader, she's being attacked. We've seen this before with Gaddafi, with Assad. She's not the same, you know, it's not the same context, because this is particularly, you know, this is different in the sense that the West never built up, you know, Bashar al-Assad as a hero, and, you know, they never built up Gaddafi, and they didn't win, you know, Nobel Prizes and things. But they're really disgusted with her, because I guess they just wanted her to be a puppet. And it turns out she isn't, you know.
It's like she played the role of the poster girl, and she did. Like, I mean, I'm looking at a picture here where she's standing beside Bono, where they're saying she's not a saint. And
the thing is, you know, the West have always propped people up, put them in power, and then realised that those people weren't going to work for them, and then got rid of them. And that's what happens over and over again. They put dictators in power, and those dictators don't do what they're told. Yeah. And suddenly those dictators have to go.
It was like Saddam Hussein as a prime example.
Yeah, this is what's happening. I mean, the West for years loved Saddam Hussein. I remember when I was a child, you know, just watching RT reports, it was almost a report every day on the Iran-Iraq war. Remember?
Yeah, and Saddam was the hero back then, and he was slagging off the Iranians.
All I knew is that Saddam was the good guy, you know, and
I remember all that myself now. I mean, it was seeing the likes of that on TV that got me interested in politics, because I'd seen that in the 80s. Saddam Hussein was the hero, and then in the 90s, all of a sudden, I was living in London at the time. He's just invaded Kuwait, but he was given permission to invade Kuwait because allegedly it used to be theirs.
Yeah, and he was told to do it.
He was told to go in.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you know, it doesn't take long for someone to be demonized, and they're using the Muslim diaspora, you know, big Muslim diaspora in Britain and in France. And they're out, like, it's kind of depressing to see the amount of Muslims, even colleagues of mine, just falling for all this. It's so depressing, falling for all the sectarian hatred.
I see it myself, like
victimology, you know, victimology, the whole idea that the world is against Islam. They've really kind of interiorized this very, very Jewish victimology. Like, the Jews behave like that as well. They're always the victims, and they're never self-critical.
And it's just pure propaganda, is all it is. It's pure propaganda.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and they did this during the Yugoslav wars as well, and I wrote about that in the article I wrote about Myanmar. You know, that Robert Fisk was playing this up in the Kosovan war. He was saying, "Oh, the Kosovans are the Palestinians, and the Serbs are the Israelis, and so on." And it was just complete nonsense. But it basically roused a lot of naive Muslims in Britain to support Blair's bombing of the country.
Yeah.
And this is what they're doing here as well. And now, for example, in France, they have Muslims demonstrating every week, calling for military intervention. They're actually calling with loudspeakers for military intervention. And who's going to do that? Only NATO, the Security Council.
Yeah.
So I mean, and a lot of people who are supporting this support. There are people who know what happened in Syria. It's the lack of knowledge of this country. It's very easy to tell fairy tales about countries people know nothing about,
Yeah.
And what do we know about Myanmar or Bangladesh?
I mean, I know nothing. I've learned more about Myanmar tonight.
Before I started, I mean, for me, it was a blank slate. It took me a long time to figure out these countries.
I mean, I've learned more about the place tonight than I've ever known. Just talking to yourself, and like having this webpage up here now, looking at everything that's going on, you can see the amount of propaganda that's going on. The way they're slagging off. What's her name? Aung San Suu Kyi.
Yeah.
I mean, they're giving her an awful time in the media for even though there's no proof that she's behind any of this.
No, I mean, she's certainly not behind it. She hasn't, like, the Rohingya agencies are very well funded because they're getting money from George Soros, they're getting money from the Saudis, and they're very well organized. And the campaign, the major campaign, the word genocide, even the term Rohingya being used all the time, starts around 2011, 2012, takes off from 2012. They have an agency in Brussels, the Burmese office. They have the Rohingya Council of Europe. In a way, they've kind of learned from the Jews. The Jews are the best organizers in the world. When they want to organize something, my God, if you get targeted, they're really impressive when they want to, be heard.
Yeah.
And it seems that a lot of these Wahhabi organizations have basically applied the same principles. Have agents everywhere, be very loud in the media. People like Maung Zarni, he's one of the chief propagandists in Britain. He was supposed to debate me on Press TV, but he chickened out just before the show went on air. I only found out in the taxi just before I went into the studio that he wouldn't debate me. And of course, they never get to debate. They never debate people because nobody.
Well, they can't because they can't win the argument. I see that with George Galloway all the time.
Yeah.
I've often seen him going on the TV and someone was meant to turn up and he didn't.
Yeah, they never get challenged, so they're public relations experts.
Yeah, I mean, I seen this last night, for example. People's Internet Radio here in Ireland. Are you aware of People's Internet Radio?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Vin, I mean, it's a great show, great radio show. But he's been getting stick off this woman. I'm not going to mention her name because I'm not even going to get into her side of things, but this woman has been giving him grief, publicly, like on Facebook and stuff like that. But she went on last night onto his show. Why she did that, I don't know, but he took it to pieces. It was a brilliant piece of radio now, I have to say, and it was funny as well. But these people are out there, they think they can debate you, but when it comes down to it, they don't have it. They don't have anything. No,
because they're not trained. They're trained to just repeat, the agenda line, and that's the mythology about the Rohingya. It's I know how this works because again the US, one thing I have to say about the Americans is that they're very clever. They use all of their their research agencies to bring. Americans are really brilliant at management. It's kind of no surprise that they have all the best business management schools in the United States. They're very good at logistics and management and putting things together. But they're not very good at convincing people that their stories and their bullshit is true because... But they're good at coordination and organisation in the sense that, because, being an empire and having the agencies, the information agencies they have, what I mean is that they're very good at coordinating deception campaigns. Like, for example, a lot of people are saying, this was only the mainstream media weren't covering this before. And it's true that, the last few years, this was not headlines in the mainstream media. So they infiltrated a lot of the alternative media with these stories. And so it kind of started burning there a little bit, started gaining momentum. And the whole idea, and this is how they did the Arab Spring as well, because the US started organizing the Arab Spring in 2004. And from 2004 on, stories started appearing in kind of quasi-independent news outlets about repression and, the youth in Egypt and Tunisia. And they were building it up like that. So a lot of people were like, mainstream media are ignoring us. And that's very important, because if you're trying to create the impression that you have a popular movement that's being repressed, you have to create the impression that the Western governments don't care. So the way this works with humanitarian intervention is the activists, if you listen to them, they're always saying, British government doesn't care, the American government doesn't care, all they care about are their interests and their oil and so on. And we want intervention now. And what the Western governments do is they basically don't say that much for a while. And then they just allow this to build up. And then they kind of say, look, we have to do something because, all these human rights groups are insisting. And so, in other words, instead of like in the Iraq war, where the government comes out and says, we need to bomb the country, they get the people to come out and demand that the government bombs the country.
Yeah.
It's much more effective. And then the government is basically saying, look, we're just doing what people want us to do. And it's a brilliant propaganda strategy. The US learned from the Iraq war that coming out and trying to make a false argument for war it backfires. So after Iraq, basically they said, okay, we need more of these humanitarian wars.
Yeah, it's better if you're asked to intervene rather than you going and invading the country.
To beg us to bomb the country.
Yeah, no, there's a video that's been circulating. This is just a little off topic, but it will be connected in the future, I imagine. But there's a video doing the rounds online at the moment with Morgan Freeman. Now I don't know if you've seen it. I
haven't, because I've been on this story now for a while and I haven't looked at much else.
Google him anyway. You'll find this video because it's fairly recent. But in the video, he's saying that they're at war with Russia.
Yeah.
And I was looking at it, I was like, what is this guy talking about, And I was a Morgan Freeman fan for years. I mean, I've seen Shawshank, I don't know how many times, but I don't think I can watch him in a movie now. He's after spoiling it for me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, US actors have always been major operatives in US foreign policy. Take what's his name, like that coffee guy, the guy
George Clooney.
Yeah, Clooney. Yeah. I mean, he was very much involved in Sudan in selling the whole genocide thing in Sudan.
He was. Him and what's her face, Angelina Jolie. She was involved in all of that as well. And
it was the CIA that basically, along with the Israelis, who basically set up a civil war there. It went on for years, and then they created the Darfur crisis, and that was also about containing China and Chinese access to oil. But Clooney, he's a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. All these US actors, DiCaprio,
all these are UN ambassadors.
Hollywood is the US government. Like, I mean, once you, that's the deal with Hollywood. Once you become a big shot in Hollywood,
that's the price you pay.
The US government, and that's just they all do. This. I mean, notable exceptions, I suppose, of Oliver Stone, and people like that. But
yeah, I mean, even Oliver Stone, don't get me wrong, I like Oliver Stone and I like his son as well. His son makes some good documentaries, but I can't help thinking as well, is he part of that system?
Well, he's probably not the most radical opponent of it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen more radical opponents than him.
Yeah, sure.
Who don't get any coverage. He gets all the coverage. So listen, we've got about 2 minutes left. Where do you see all of this ending up? What do you think is going to happen out in that neck of the woods?
Well, there are various, as I say, the Islamist insurgency will intensify. You're probably going to see an international jihad. Jihadists from all over the world flocking there. And then you have 3 or 4 other major insurgencies, and the West are training them as well. And they're now trying to join them all up for a full-scale war against the central government there. So that's basically, I think...
You think China might get involved?
They'll have to get involved. China has no choice. They'll have to, I think, eventually get militarily involved. So you may see the first major Chinese airstrikes.
I mean, you have Donald Trump there threatening the Rocket Man over in North Korea. Anything could kick off there at any moment.
Sure.
And it's right on the doorstep of this place. So, the whole place is just a powder cake.
I think you may see, big negotiation, like with the Russians in Syria, Chinese airstrikes and sort of a tit-for-tat war, a proxy war with the United States in Myanmar. And that would then spread into Thailand as well. And the Philippines and right throughout the region. So I think
interesting times ahead
for Southeast Asian people. It's a return of the Cold War. It's kind of a return of the nightmare.
It's some interesting times we're going to be living in. Gearóid, do you have a website? Do you want to give out the name of your website before we go?
Yeah, it's www.gearoidoccolmáin.org.
So that's how you pronounce it, Gearóid Ó Colmáin.
Sinead.
Yeah, Sinead. Happy days.
It's Oscar German who, I know you're a German, so.
No, I'm not German. I'm actually Irish. You don't call a dog a horse if he's born in a stable. I just happen to be born over there. But my parents are from Dublin. But as a result of being born in Germany, I was exempt from having to learn Irish in school. Much to my regret, I should have learned the language, but I didn't. Right. But I can read Irish quite good. I just don't know Irish that well, But
I used to be Irish language activist when I lived in Dublin.
Fair play to you. I love the Irish language. I think it's a beautiful language.
I write for Nose sometimes up in Belfast.
One day, hopefully, before I die, I will learn how to speak it properly. But I've got an English stepson, and he speaks better Irish than I do. Anyway, listen, I have come to the end of the show. And listen, Gearóid, thanks very much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Okay, good
maha. And listen, you take care and look after yourself.
Okay, same to you.
Talk to you again soon. Thanks very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that was Gearóid Ó Colmáin. He works from Paris. He's based over in Paris, and he's a journalist. And he's been watching what's going on in Myanmar now for the last good few years. And fair play to him. He's a better authority on the place than I am. I mean, I hadn't a clue what was really going on out there, but it's interesting. And the reason it's interesting is because Donald Trump threatening the Rocket Man in North Korea. If it kicks off there, China will get involved. All sorts of crap is going to start coming down the line. But anyway, folks, this has been The World You Don't Know. Sorry to bring so much doom and gloom, but sure, that's the nature of the show. Anyway, I have come to the end of the show. And remember, the Facebook page is The World You Don't Know on Facebook. You go on there and like it, and there'll be a podcast of the show up there. Hopefully by tomorrow, I should have the podcast up. Remember, folks, the world is full of great people. If you can't find one, be one. Talk to us all again very soon.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Breaking humanity, one soul at a time. This is the World You Don't Know radio show with your host, Nick O'Connell.